What's up, everybody? It is the Line Movement Pre-Kickoff Show, another special Saturday edition here. It is my favorite divisional slate, or I was trying to say it's my favorite football slate of the week. It is divisional weekend. I'm here with the betting maven, Matt LaMarca, and the DFS maven, Joe Holka. How we doing, guys?
I'm good. LaMarca, go ahead. Pete and I have been talking all morning, so I want to hear how your day's going.
Yeah, I'm off to a solid start, although honestly, not a great start in terms of sleep recovery. Only 24% on my Whoop band, so I got to be doing a better job there. But other than that, we're doing great, man. I'm feeling good. The diet's going well. My basketball stuff is been good, so yeah, I can't complain.
There you go. So the plan for today is we're going to run through all the games. We're going to put a little bit more focus on the Saturday slate because we will be back tomorrow with Dieter 2 hours before kickoff to do our other pre-kickoff show. So we're going to focus on the Saturday slate, but because we have the big 4-game slates on DraftKings, we will touch on those games as well, especially if you're trying to get in your bets, your parlays, all of that good stuff. We have you covered here. And I say we start right up top here with this Rams-Green Bay game. I'm currently seeing Green Bay still holding as a 7-point home favorite here. LaMarca, are there any sickos out there willing to bet on Jared Goff on the road in the cold at Lambeau?
Yeah, the big theme of this week is that all these games are pretty much split right down the middle. The Packers are the most public team of the week at this point, but they're only getting 59% of the spread bets. So this spread is hovering. It's either 7 or 6.5, depending on where you're looking. The consensus line I'm seeing right now is 6.5, but that's kind of where this game is at. Once it gets to 7, it seems like the sharps are willing to take the Rams, and under that, they have been a little bit more reluctant. This is an interesting matchup, right? I mean, Goff with the thumb injury in Green Bay, it's going to be a tough matchup, cold weather. But on the other side, you couldn't really design a better defense for facing the Packers than what the Rams have. You know, pressure up the middle with Aaron Donald, and you hope that Jalen Ramsey can hold his own against Devontae Adams, who has been by far the best receiver in football this season. So I'm pretty conflicted on this game. I think that I personally would lean with the Rams getting the points, but it's always scary to go against Rodgers. He's 11-6-1 against the spread in the playoffs throughout his career. So you can get him laying less than a full touchdown if you believe in the Packers. I think that it might be just a smidge too high.
And do you have any thought on the over under? It looks like it opened at 46.5, has been pushed down to 45.5 right now. What's your lean there?
Yeah, so I'm always going to be looking at the under in outdoor playoff games. It didn't work for me last week, just 1-4, but historically the under in outdoor playoff games is 82, 65, and 4, dating back to 2004. So we're also seeing some big time sharp activity on the under, just 44% of the bets, but 82% of the dollars. So there's some questions about how the Rams will be able to move the ball. You know, Jared Goff wasn't asked to do very much last week against Seattle. So I think that the sharps between this game being outdoors in cold weather and the issues with the Rams potentially moving the ball, I think that they are happy to take the under at the current number.
Joe, we're about 20 minutes away here from inactives being submitted. I think the big one right now is Cooper Kupp. There was a Peter Schrager tweet a few minutes ago saying that he's truly a game time decision and on the bad side of it. And he says, even if he does go, that he's nowhere close to 100%. How do you think Cooper Kupp being really limited or not playing at all kind of affects the rest of the options here for the Rams?
Yeah, so there's two sides of it, right? Like obviously a pretty big bump for Josh Reynolds. He's 3,200 on a slate where we really don't have a lot of like super mega punt wide receiver options. So I think that if you're going to get out of the gates here in game number 1, at least try and get some savings. Josh Reynolds, even before the Cooper Kupp news comes out, I think is still a reasonable play. I guess my concern, if Kupp isn't in or if he's extremely limited and he is in, we've seen Jared Goff really rely on him heavily. When Jared Goff is having really strong games, it's usually when Cooper Kupp is being pretty heavily involved. So I think that limits the ceiling for this passing game for sure. I think, I guess the idea here is there's going to be some pretty low ownership on these pass catchers across the board. So we've talked about it with our tilt space teams. Like, do we want to try and take a shot on, I guess, fading Cam Akers on some of these teams and getting in some of these other ancillary like Rams pass catchers? Like, do we want a Higbee team? Do we want to try and get in a Josh Reynolds who's super cheap? Maybe Robert Woods ends up getting squeezed kind of in that mid range. So I think there's definitely some lower ownership to be had in this game. That said, there's just really not a ton to like in terms of like this game going absolutely crazy. I'm with LaMarca. I'm not really big on Aaron Rodgers in this spot, at least as a DFS play. I think one thing that I'm trying to piece my way through before lock here is what is the difference of ownership that you can get on a guy like Aaron Jones versus Devontae Adams. I think the Devontae Adams thing versus Jalen Ramsey is something we've talked about the entire week, but also I think what's probably hasn't been talked about enough is how much Adams does go into the slot and Ramsey doesn't go in the slot. So if we're going to get like 30-40% of our Adams routes in the slot throughout this game, he could be one of those guys that, Pete, you mentioned, these like death by 1,000 cut type of players. And we know his role in the red zone is going to be super strong anyway. So like, I'm warming up to Adams a little bit. I hate burning like an elite, like a wide receiver price tag in game number one, because it limits what you can do if it goes really bad. But from an ownership perspective, I think it's something that makes some sense on certain teams. I guess, Pete, I want to kick it back to you on Akers, though, because it sounds like just as this morning has gone on, you're a little bit, I guess, less bullish on Akers than most of the field, which might be a good place to be if you're right.
Yeah, I'm pretty out on Akers. I get the bull case for him. I think he's going to end up being one of the highest owned players on the slate. He's definitely mispriced at 5,700. I just think this is an awful spot for the Rams. They are 7-point underdogs. They have the lowest implied team total on the slate. I have visions of the Titans going into Green Bay a few weeks ago in week 17. LaMarca will know this because he had Derrick Henry on his underdog best ball team, tried to sweat that. And they just got trucked by Green Bay here now, coming a week off of rest. I think this is going to be a low scoring game. It's a gross game. And we also haven't seen Akers since they've kind of turned to him as their main back in a negative game script. So I think his catch projection is wildly all over the place. Like, I could see him having only 1 or 2 targets, and I could also see him having 5 or 6 if they're truly committed to him. So I just think this is a much more fragile play than the ownership is dictating. I'm playing him in cash. Like, I'm not even worrying about it. But to me, I think he's an easy tournament fade. That's just kind of where I'm at. LaMarca, do you have you want to break a tie here?
Yeah, I mean, he's too cheap. You know, like 5,700 is not a good price tag for him. But I agree with all of your concerns. And one of the reasons that I think that this is one of my favorite slates we've talked about so far is that I think that the 2 biggest chalk running backs have a lot of bust potential. So I
real
like.
Quick. Sorry, guys. We're not live on the main YouTube, and people in the chat are acting like we're not live.
Really?
Yeah. I just refreshed the
says
YouTube.
we're live for me. I'll do double check right now. Yeah.
We're live on mine.
Yeah, hold on. Are we getting trolled?
I don't see the chat. I don't see the chat live, though. The chat's not moving.
So I just refreshed mine again, and it says waiting for us. And Willis just said, I heard they aren't going live until they get 40 likes. So something's
I don't
up.
even see the chat moving. Is there 2 like events?
You know what? We're on the event for tomorrow right now. It must have gotten swapped up. I'll see if I could edit it.
Yeah, edit the title. I'll hide the other one at the same time.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, so but we're good right now.
Stay where we're at. We'll retweet it. So yeah, it's.
What should I tell this chat that's in here? Should I tell them to head over to the other video?
Drop the link, maybe. I just dropped the link to where we are currently.
Okay.
That's where Jordan's going to edit the title.
Okay, I see it. Sorry, I got confused because I popped out that chat.
We're definitely on the wrong event.
Yeah, that's my bad. I did it too early this morning.
I wondered why it said Dieter.
So yeah, we're good to go on my end now, guys.
Okay. My bad, guys. We are back. We're figuring out some of our stuff. We had left some people behind in the other event. They are going to be trickling in to join us. We are talking about Cam Akers. We are talking about the Rams here. LaMarca, remind me now. You said you agree with my concerns, but you still maybe on the fence about whether you'd be playing him in your lineups?
No, I think you're spot on with your take. I think that he's too cheap for cash games, but I worry about the ceiling for tournaments. When you consider that he's going to be the highest owned running back on the slate, I'm fine with fading him. And honestly, I like fading the other chalky running back too. So, which is why I think that this is a pretty good slate from a game theory perspective. The guy that I think is just not getting nearly enough love is Aaron Jones. I think he's the best running back play on the slate, especially if you have concerns about Devontae Adams. Him and Adams are very negatively correlated, negative 40%. So if this is a spot where you think Adams might be a bit limited, Jones should eat. And he has historically thrived as a home favorite, like a lot of running backs do. But Jones in particular crushes in those spots. So I think getting him at 6,800 and not being like the lock nut running back play of the week makes him my favorite way to attack this game.
And on that note, Curtis Patrick over at RotoViz posted some split stuff, backing up what you were just saying. Devontae Adams at home, 47 fewer receiving yards, 4.6 fewer PPR points. Aaron Jones, 55 more rushing yards at home, 7.15 more fantasy points. And I think there's also the narrative too. We see a lot of tomfoolery with kind of the usage during the regular season. You never know. They're, managing injuries, kind of load management stuff. They're going to get the ball to the best players today. And I think Aaron Jones is going to see, around 20 plus touches, and they're going to be high value touches. We've even seen Jamal Williams, who had previously been the thorn in his side as far as stealing away the pass work, kind of really disappear in that capacity. He's still stealing a few touches, but he hasn't been stealing those valuable targets. So I'm with you guys. I love Aaron Jones here, and I still like Devontae Adams. I mean, we were talking about it with Leone. I do think when people look at the slate and they want to play Michael Thomas, who's way too underpriced, everyone loves Kelsey and Tyreek Hill, rightfully so. Everyone loves Diggs. Someone is getting squeezed, and ultimately, I think people are going to like Aaron Jones a little bit more. They're going to worry about Jalen Ramsey, and I think Adams is going to be a good play too, even despite those splits, just because of his red zone role, his rapport with Rodgers. The way they use him at the goal line just gives him such a high floor. Joe, do you have any hesitations about Devontae Adams here with Ramsey, knowing we might get a little bit of an ownership discount?
Yeah, I'm never really that concerned about like the one-on-one matchup. My concern is that it's game number one. He's a really expensive wide receiver. It's like as simple as that. I think that people think through these things a little bit deeper than they should in some ways. Like it matters the game order versus like how good the actual play is, and the ownership matters. Like these slates are completely different. We have so much time in between games to figure out where our lineups are at. There's going to be, if we go out there and we have all this Devontae Adams exposure, if we open up our contest, we see he's 35, 40%, we're not feeling great, or at least I'm not feeling great. If we get a 15 to 20% Devontae Adams in some of our contests, that's a lot of leverage that we can kind of eat that salary in game number one. I think that's where it does make a decent amount of sense. So it depends on where you think he's going to be in your specific contest, and also what type of roster that's going to lead you to. I love the Aaron Jones play personally. That's been one that I've been kind of warming up to as the morning goes on, for sure, just because I think that the way that these elite wide receivers kind of shake out, it's going to take a lot of salary to get there. It's going to take a lot of salary to get to these Kansas City stacks, but we're just looking at guys like Alvin Kamara at the top end of running back. It's much easier to have Alvin Kamara in your lineup and also have Cam Akers, Singletary, some of these other cheaper guys at running backs. I think there's at least a chance that Aaron Jones ends up being the one, at least in that group of like the guys we can project for a decent amount of volume here. He's in game number one. People aren't going to play him and Akers together. So I'm kind of interested in Aaron Jones a little bit.
I definitely agree with that. I don't think people will do too many Jones Akers lineups together. And, Joey Donnelly in the chat saying RB for me today, flexibility for Sunday. I think that is one of the big decision points on the slate, because we have so much news still to come with the running backs tomorrow. We are waiting on the Clyde Edwards-Helaire status. Seems like he is pretty shaky. And then we're also trying to figure out what's going on with Ronald Jones. He did get in some limited practices, but there's a chance he's not 100%. So any of those things could open up paths to Darrell Williams, Le'Veon Bell, Leonard Fournette being really good points per dollar plays at their salaries. So leaving yourself flexibility, I think, makes a lot of sense. And, for cash, though, on the flip side, I do agree with Joey, and like I'm going to be playing Akers and Singletary because I don't want the uncertainty of not playing them, banking on one of those other guys to open up, and then they don't, and then I'm screwed. And personally, I think Singletary is similar to those other guys if they open up. So I'd rather just break ties with the information. LaMarca, do you have any thoughts on kind of how to handle that with still some of these plays not yet solidified?
Yeah, I think I'm approaching it where Ronald Jones, they've already said that even if he's active, he's not going to start. I think he might be like a break glass, in case of emergency type of thing. We've already seen them do that with him once this season. So I think that Fournette's the guy in Tampa Bay, at least for one more week. But yeah, I mean, flexibility is always a good thing. Joe, the way you were describing locking Adams in and how it limits your flexibility, like that's very sharp. We probably don't talk about that stuff as much as we should in the DFS community. Here's one other question that I'm tackling right now, and I think a lot of people are going to be tackling as well. If we do think that Cooper Kupp is limited, right, that would normally put us onto Robert Woods getting a larger target share. But the Ramsey versus Adams matchup, I think, has overshadowed the fact that the best cornerback in football plays for the Green Bay Packers. And he is going to be seeing a lot of Robert Woods in this matchup. So if we can't rely on him, we can't rely on Kupp. Like, does it make sense to load up on Josh Reynolds? I know we said that we're struggling to find some value plays at wide receiver. Like, I think he makes a lot of sense at 3,200. Like, how are we just approaching this wide receiver core in general?
Yeah,
Good point.
Joe and I were talking about this earlier, and one thing that's hard on these slates, right, is where are our edges and how can we push them? And one of the biggest edges we have are plays that aren't talked about through the week because of late breaking news. No one has done content assuming that Cooper Kupp is out. So we haven't got steam on Josh Reynolds, and both Joe and I were comparing notes. Derek Carty over at RotoGrinder, Sean Corner over at Fantasy Labs. Both have aggressive projections on Josh Reynolds, or Cooper Kupp has officially been ruled out. Like, those projections haven't even been adjusted yet, and they're already popping as a points per dollar play. Like, outside of Rashard Higgins, Josh Reynolds, Cardi has him as the best point per dollar play under 4,100. So I'm very intrigued by Josh Reynolds because I don't think he'll be popular. And I also am intrigued by Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett, a little bit more so Tyler Higbee. But if we do kind of buy that shutdown corner narrative and Cooper Kupp is out, Higbee and Reynolds are like screaming out at me right now.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you. This is an interesting game because it doesn't really shape up for like a ton of points on paper, but like if you're gonna win a slate like this, grabbing a piece from every game at times, like especially if you feel like some of them are gonna go super underowned, like this is the game that you need to like kind of get a little bit different, I think, and take some chances. I think to Pete's point, with Akers being extremely chalky, if you wanted to have some wide open teams with Akers just to kind of cover your ass in that way, I think that's fine. But if you hit on like a Higbee or you hit on one of these really lower owned pieces in this game, or even just a Devontae Adams who's lower than you think should be, it can make a big deal for the rest of the way.
Yeah. We're going to circle back to this here in a few minutes once we get confirmation on the Kupp news. We should be getting that in about 7 or 8 minutes. But let's move on to our night game tonight. Awesome game. We have Baltimore traveling to Buffalo. It opened with them as 3-point road dogs, 49.5 over under. What kind of movement have we seen since that open, Matt? And what are the Sharps doing?
Yeah, so this is another game where the betting activity has been really split down the middle. Buffalo's getting 55% of the tickets, 52% of the money. Normally, less money than tickets is not a good thing, but it should be noted that early in the week, all the money was pouring in on the Ravens. So I think what happened here is when they had the full field goal available, the Sharps took the Ravens early. But now that it's 2.5, the money has slowly started trickling back in on Buffalo. And I personally do think that Buffalo is the correct side here. I know that their defense, the Ravens defense, was very impressive last week against the Titans, but I was not impressed with their offense, only scoring 20 points against Tennessee, who has been, gashed by everybody all season, is not going to get the job done. Like, they're going to need more than 20 points this week against Buffalo. Josh Allen is just too good. He's playing too good right now. He's great against the blitz. Baltimore loves to blitz. It's a matchup where I think Buffalo is going to put up enough points that they're going to give their defense some flexibility. And they have been playing better on that side of the ball as well. They're 8th in weighted DVOA defensively from Football Outsiders, which puts a higher premium on games that happen towards the end of the season. So I do think Buffalo's the correct side. As far as the total goes, 70% of the bets are on the over, but just 53% of the money. So again, another outdoor playoff game. It does seem like the Sharps are taking the under on this total. But other than that, it's pretty much split, guys. It should be a good game. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, you mentioned the total. We should check in on the weather. That was kind of a big narrative earlier in the week. Lamar having never played in the snow. Kevin Roth over at Roto Grinders had an update today on his feed saying not expecting anything more than a passing snow shower or flurry. So
what a great gig, by the way. Like,
yes.
how did he just become the official DFS weather guy?
Unreal.
There might be others. He's the best that I know of. So
it's a great niche. I wish I knew weather. I would try to get into that game.
Well, it is funny because now there's 100 like fantasy doctors, but they're really, the meteorologists haven't come out of the woodwork like they have. Anyway, so he says though that the wind is the greater concern. It sounds like we might get 20-mile-per-hour gusts early on and approaching 30-mile-per-hour gusts later in the game. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Although we've hashed this out throughout the season with some of these Cleveland games, it's really when we get to the outlier extremes of 40, 50 mile per hour gusts that we want to start docking things. So I wouldn't make any adjustments based on this news. Although I will say I would have just assumed that this total would have been a little higher, Matt. And I assumed it was because of weather. And now if the weather's not an issue, is this total maybe just a smidge off?
I think that these two teams are underrated defensively. Like Buffalo, we don't talk about them being a good defensive team, but they really have become a defensive team. And Baltimore, they sagged off a bit at the end of the season, but they were dealing with a lot of injuries in their secondary. They missed like 3 straight games without Calais Campbell. Brandon Williams, their nose tackle, has missed some games too. And now that they're back at full strength, they really did a great job against the Titans offense that has been pretty explosive. So I do think that this line is trying to encourage people to take the over, which it has succeeded in doing with 70% of the bets landing there. But it wouldn't surprise me if this game was a little bit lower scoring than expected.
Yeah. So Joe, I mean, how have you been thinking about this game for, DFS? I think we're going to talk about the Chiefs game tomorrow, which I think is where everyone's excited to load up on. Is this a game where you could kind of go overweight and stack it? Or do you think it's time we need to pump the brakes and pick our spots similar to how we're doing in the Rams-Packers game?
Yeah, I think pumping the brakes on both of these games on Saturday certainly makes some sense from a flexibility standpoint. Also, they're just the games that don't shape quite up as well for points. But I think that there's still a chance that Josh Allen ends up being one of those quarterbacks that separates a little bit. I know you're interested in Lamar, Pete, just because he seems like he's going to be the lowest owned of some of these guys that have a realistic ceiling. So I think that if you are rolling out Josh Allen, there's pieces of this game that still make a lot of sense. I think if people are going to be scared off of Stephon Diggs just because of like, and on paper, you want to attack Buffalo on the interior. Stephon Diggs moves around enough to where even if he has Humphreys in the slot, he's still going to be in a decent opportunity to just rack up those catches. So I think that Stephon Diggs is still very much in play. He's at that same price point that he was roughly at last week, and everyone was falling over themselves to play him. And now he's only going to be like 25-30% owned, at least what we're looking at right now. So he seems like a guy, if you wanted to get a little bit of savings off of Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs is someone a little bit more expensive than Michael Thomas later on the slate that I think still could be one of those guys that could be a key to kind of getting all the way to the top. So I like that. I think what LaMarca said was really sharp about if this team is going to be one that blitzes a ton in terms of the Ravens. Like Josh Allen has been very strong against the blitz at times this year. And I think part of it is he extends the play and gives these guys like Stephon Diggs, like John Smokey Brown, the ability to get down the field. So I think there's going to be some shots that are taken in this game because like when you're just going all out with the blitz, you can't do everything down the field to defend both at the same time. So I think that if this game ends up going nuts, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a really high efficiency game from Josh Allen and some of these pass catchers. So it has me intrigued by Diggs and Smokey Brown. I know there's some people that are going to be on Cole Beasley because on paper, like attack them in the slot, but I have less interest in Beasley versus Diggs and Smokey Brown. I think we're trying to get some big plays in game number 2.
Back to the quarterback thing, the thing I'm wrestling with is obviously Mahomes ownership wise is going to be a tier of his own. And then right now, the ownership I'm looking at has Josh Allen around 20%, Lamar Jackson around the 10 to 12%. To me, that's like a pretty meaningful gap, but I do think there's a chance that all of these guys underneath Mahomes end up being pretty flat. You know, where Brady and Baker and Allen and Jackson are all kind of roughly in the same, to where I can't meaningfully leverage it, where if that is true and I could get Lamar Jackson at 10%, I do love that a lot. If they're all the same, it's a little trickier for me just because, like we've said, we don't necessarily love this game from a shootout potential, knowing how they want to play. The thing that's kind of warping my brain is not a lot of people are talking about Josh Allen. They've been extremely pass happy all season. Now they don't even have their grinder back. So Devin Singletary will be the guy on the field. They're probably going to be even more up tempo than usual. So I don't know, am I missing something here, LaMarca? Why are we less collectively enthused about the Bills right now?
I think it's just like the volume is a little bit lower on them because it's just so friggin' high on Kansas City. And, you know, we'll talk about Kansas City in a little bit, but Patrick Mahomes plus Andy Reid plus 14 days to prepare is just pure death for opposing defenses. So if you're bullish on Kansas City, like basically everybody else in the world is, it's hard to fit in a Stephon Diggs around a Kansas City stack.
For sure.
You know, like that's why I think Devin Singletary will be the direction that people go in this game. But I have major concerns about Devin Singletary. Like, he is not going to get the goal line carries. That's going to be Josh Allen for the most part. The Bills have not run the ball at all. You know, we're talking, I think they had like less than 10 carries with their running backs last week. Maybe he can get there catching passes out of the backfield. That's sort of like what you're hoping for if you roster Singletary here. But I don't think that's necessarily a lock. You know, like Josh Allen has not been targeting his running backs at a super high rate this season. So again, like it's a price tag where Singletary doesn't have a ton of bust potential, but for his ownership, I don't see the ceiling. Like I don't see the 15 to 20 point ceiling that his current ownership projection sort of seems to suggest.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of these pass catchers here. You know, we've talked about Diggs, you know, John Brown coming off the bagel. He burned a lot of people last week. You also have Cole Beasley. Both Beasley and Brown, I think, aren't going to catch a lot of ownership. Both, I would assume, would be under 15%. We have Marquise Brown, who looks a little underpriced relative to his usage from last week. I mean, they were really scheming creative, or sometimes I would say uncreative plays for him, 15 yards behind the line of scrimmage. But you can't question his usage here. And then Mark Andrews, who is, I think, might actually get squeezed a little bit at tight end ownership wise because people love getting up to Kelsey and they love going down to Hooper. Mark Andrews, he's going to get some ownership, but he might not be as high as we initially thought. Joe, do you have thoughts on, if you are picking your spots here with maybe some of our mini correlations we like, which of these guys jump out to you?
Yeah, Marquise Brown was a guy at 5,200 that just from a price perspective, like you said, really stood out like from like basically as soon as it came out on Monday when we were all looking at these. So I think that's interesting. But yeah, as the morning goes on, like as you're building teams, it's not easy to build Mark Andrews teams like at all. Like you said, it's a lot more gets comfortable in roster construction to justify just going up to a Travis Kelce because that makes a lot of sense, or just going down to Hooper. And those are like the main guys. Like it's not like there's a ton of options on this slate at tight end. I don't think many people are going to talk themselves into a Tyler Higbee or a Robert Tonyan in game number one. Like we have like Gronk later on, Jared Cook, I guess, but like none of those guys are really projecting for a ton of ownership. So like once people start building teams, I'm with you, man. I think Mark Andrews, like he's projecting for around like sub 20% ownership on a 3-game slate for a guy that's going to be involved. I think that makes it makes me like him a little bit better than Hollywood just because of the position scarcity as a whole. I think that another part of this that like the floor is always a little bit scarier for these guys with Lamar just because the volume isn't always going to be there for the passing game in general. So I think that the ceiling's there, the floor, there's definitely a little bit more volatility. 5K for Mark Andrews, just a weird price to make work with rosters, I think.
Andrews is also just one of the most tilting players to sweat because he drops so many balls that Lamar hits him right in the chest with, but you can see the ceiling there with him. I mean, he's always within range of that 2-touchdown game based on how they look for him in the red zone. So yeah, I think I want to work some Mark Andrews into my lineups here. And then let's just do this. I feel like now I am fully on J.K. Dobbins Island. He's not a guy I'm jamming. He is a guy I want exposure to now that I have him here at 7% ownership. He's obviously priced too high, which is, contributing to the ownership. Last week, he was more affordable and his ownership got steamed. But when you look at some of the prop betting markets, I mean, my guys over at Bet the Prop, they were hammering him over 67 yards rushing, which sets a pretty nice floor for him there. Mark Ingram, a healthy scratch again today. And you beat the Bills through the interior, is kind of how teams have been attacking them. So I still have love for J.K. Dobbins at this ownership. It's an ownership play for me. Joe, I know, hates J.K. Dobbins. I'll let you guys tell me what a fish I am for doing this again.
I don't hate J.K. Dobbins. I hate J.K. Dobbins at 6K when he's going to touch the ball 10 times, man. Like that's my issue with it. It's the price. It's not the fact that there's ceiling there. He's been scoring touchdowns. I get all of that. I just think the price is bad. So yeah, if this ends up being the slate where he's like the key at like sub 10% ownership, then man, I'll definitely be the first one to take that L. I can't do it. LaMarca?
I think I side more with Pete. Like I do think from a pure leverage perspective, right? If we're talking just ceiling versus ownership, Dobbins might have the best leverage at the running back position this week. Does he have a lot of bust potential? Yes, but he can definitely get us, 25 DK points. So I'm not going out of my way to like build a ton of teams with J.K. Dobbins, but I do think that there's a potential that he ends up being like the highest scoring running back on the slate.
Pete, you want 10 touches? Can I interest you in Gus Edwards for $1,800 cheaper?
No, you can't. Yeah, J.K. Dobbins has a much higher ceiling than Gus Edwards. They have been using him at the goal line, and he also has of the two running backs, he's the one that can break off a 60-yard touchdown there.
Wow. And big news, Pete.
Cooper Kupp out.
Take us to space, right? Isn't that the bit?
Oh, yep. Baby.
Cooper Kupp, bursitis of the knee, will not be playing today. So, circling back to our conversation, huge boost to Reynolds, big boost for the tight ends. I think I prefer Higbee. Are there any takeaways on this news that we haven't already hit on?
I think you just have to realize that, we're an hour and a half away from the slate starting. The vast majority of the people in your lineups are not going to adapt to this type of news, right? We see this happen a couple times a year, and people just don't take advantage of it. So like you're looking at this slate yesterday, the day before, and Josh Reynolds isn't going to be someone that feels like a priority. Now he seems like a huge priority to me. I guess Tyler Higbee at 3K, that does a lot to open up the slate as well. So yeah, I'm gonna figure out ways to get exposure to all of these guys.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things, and we were talking about it with our tilt space lineups of, I don't want to load up and game stack this, but I want to take shots on Reynolds. I want to take shots on Higbee, and I even want to take shots on Woods. I know he's going to see a lot of whatever that cornerback who's good is coverage. But they use Woods in creative ways. They'll scheme him all over. They'll give him carries and stuff. So I'm not too worried with him just getting, blanketed for the entire afternoon. Let's real quick talk about Singletary, and then we can touch on these other two games tomorrow. Also, if you guys are watching, smash the subscribe button. Give us those likes. Sorry about the confusion earlier with the different shows. We will be back tomorrow at Joe. What time are we going for this tomorrow?
Yeah, I have the tweet ready just because it's been so weird this week. So tomorrow, I'll be live at 11 a.m. Eastern time on my channel. We will be live here at 1 p.m. Eastern time for the Line Movement show. So yeah, with the start times, we figured that we would at least keep to our normal schedule of like giving you guys enough time to do your building after this and that sort of thing. And then the tilt space, we're still kind of TBD at the moment, right? For when we're going to be going live for the tilt space, Pete.
Yeah, so that Tampa Bay New Orleans game 6:40. We generally go live around 6:30. I think basically we're using a flex option here, and if we are absolutely buried, we'll probably go live a little earlier, talk about some of our late swap scenarios. If we have a sweat, we will probably go live a little later into that game, so then we can stay on air for the rest of the game as the slate ends. So somewhere in the 6 to 7:30 range is when we will be starting tomorrow. And if we have a clearer picture of that, we'll tweet stuff out and let you guys know when we plan to go live. So that is the housekeeping. Real quick, Singletary before we move on. He's going to be very popular. He is underpriced relative to having this backfield to himself without Zach Moss. He's at 4,500. As far as a points per dollar play, jumping off the page is one of the best ones on this slate. I am hearing a lot of chatter about him being bad chalk. I understand that in that he's going to lose goal line work still to Josh Allen, might not even get a goal line or red zone carry himself. That said, I'll just read off his backfield touches in the 3 games without Zach Moss earlier this year: 17 touches, 23 touches, and 12 touches. And in the 12 touch game, that was one where they were trailing 28-10 and TJ Yeldon was coming in and getting a decent amount. So I personally feel pretty confident in his role. Where are you guys at on Devin Singletary being bad chalk or good chalk? I think he's a cash lock, but let's talk GPPs here.
I think he's bad chalk if I had to be on one side of the fence or the other side. I just think that this time of year, you see these running quarterbacks even take on more in that regard. So I think there's going to be a lot of like designed runs for Josh Allen around the goal line. And like, I get the price. There should be a decent amount of volume there. But yeah, I think that you're not looking at that as a ceiling play. You're looking at that as a play that helps you get to some of the Chiefs and some of the more expensive guys the rest of the way.
What about you, LaMarca?
Yeah, I'm also in the bad chalk camp. Josh Allen, like Joe was saying, he had 12 carries last week. I doubt there were a ton of games that he had double-digit rushing attempts during the regular season. It looks like just 3. So I think that Allen will be toting the rock. Like I honestly would probably take Allen carries over Singletary carries if I was getting decent enough odds in this game. So my interesting, like, the thought that I've been having, and I'm going to run this by you and see what you guys think. What do you think about stacking the Bills with like the cheaper plays? Like an Allen, Brown, Beasley stack, run it back with Marquise, and then also then jamming in Kelsey and Hill on the Kansas City side. That gives you essentially like you're getting some of the upside of the Buffalo passing game. You don't get Diggs, obviously, which is a big downside. But if that, if we're expecting a big game from Josh Allen, like we should still capture the majority of the Kansas City upside by just rostering Kelsey and Hill. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
My only issue with that is I feel like that works better if you're going down to like Baker and you're saving almost 3,000. You're only saving 600 on DK going from Mahomes to Josh Allen. And I think I can find that 600 elsewhere in my lineup. Like I'd even rather just go down to Rams D or something like that and just get up to Mahomes if I'm doing it. So I don't mind the idea. I just don't know if it makes sense with how bunched together their pricing is.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. I think it's really hard to get to Mahomes, so I get it. But yeah, I think that like getting unique with your Josh Allen stacks is interesting. Like kind of getting in the weeds a little bit more with Showdown and just seeing that like no one's gonna play a guy like Dawson Knox. Smokey Brown just burned a lot of people, so yeah, I think that's fine. Just trying game number 2 again. It's not the same as just trying to take some shots in game number 1 and hope it works out. But find him some unique plays in that Bills game. I think will set you off in a good spot for where all the chalk mostly is going to be tomorrow anyway.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to these next games. We've talked a lot about the Chiefs and Browns. I don't think we necessarily need to spend too much time on Mahomes, Kelsey, and Tyreek Hill being a great play. I think the interesting thing here is all of the value on the Cleveland side of the ball. I mean, when I was going through my stuff this morning, I'm like, I don't mind Baker. I like both of the Browns running backs. I like both of the Browns wide receivers. I don't mind Austin Hooper. Looks like a good value. So to me, it's like, how are we narrowing this down? And I think it's important to get the ownership right, because it is going to be popular to go with these cheap Browns guys to fill out your premium Chiefs stack. So where are you guys at on the Browns side as far as who you prefer of this group of 4 or 5 options?
Go ahead, LaMarca.
I'm probably most interested in like Rashard Higgins, I think. Just to circle back real quick to the betting side, and you guys will talk about this tomorrow with Dieter, and you can read my full thoughts on this game over at Line Movement. But I really think Kansas City can turn this one into a laugher. We've seen 6 games with Mahomes and Reed getting at least 13 days to prepare. They've scored at least 31 in all 6 games, and they've scored at least 40 3 times, including 3 of the last 4 times. So this offense is going off. And as good as Baker has been, I'm not sure he is like the best equipped to keep up with Patrick Mahomes in a shootout. He's like more of an efficiency type quarterback at this point. I don't necessarily see him as a volume type quarterback. So I'm a little bit more skeptical of the Cleveland side than most. And it does seem like Cleveland is going to be a public underdog, by the way. They are getting the slight majority of the betting tickets. People like what they have seen from them the past, 5-6 weeks. So I'm a little bit more skeptical of the Cleveland side than I think a lot of other people are.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, but they can their ancillary options can still definitely get there in garbage time. If they are getting boat race, we've seen the Browns, willingness to go up tempo. Baker can move the ball. So I think Hooper, Landry, Higgins could all have nice PPR days, even the running backs too. I mean, where are you, Joe, on the Hub versus Chunt? The Chubb versus Hunt thing, because it's interesting, right? Chubb got some of the screen work last week, took a pass to the house that kind of, defied conventional wisdom. Then we see Hunt getting the rushing touchdowns. And now there's a decent price disparity, but the ownership I'm seeing is relatively similar. Chubb definitely expensive. I kind of think that ownership might be wrong, and Hunt might get more love here just at that price point. Where are you at with the running backs?
I think it says a lot about this slate when I just I think that exactly what you just said makes me not like either of them that much, because if you're going to be paying that price tag for Chubb, you're going to hope to get those touchdowns, which have been going to Kareem Hunt. If you're going to play Kareem Hunt, you're paying down for a more popular option as a bring back, but also a guy that hasn't really been touching the ball more than 10 times in a game anyway. So he's priced kind of where he should be. Like last week, people see like the box score. He scores 2 touchdowns. Sure, he touched the ball 9 times. Best of luck. So I think I'm going to have a lot of wide receiver in the flex this week just by default, because I don't really like many of the running back plays overall. I guess that's one of my biggest arguments in favor of Cam Akers, Pete. It's just like there's really not a lot else that I like at running back outside of Aaron Jones and Alvin Kamara.
Yeah, well, one guy that I'm actually very interested in is I want to leave room for how this CEH situation unfolds. And I think he is a running back worth keeping in your flex, because at that price point, you could go to your preference of Le'Veon Bell or Darrell Williams. I think both would be solid plays if he was out. And then on top of that, you could pivot it over to Higgins too at 4,100. You could go down to Mecole Hardman. You could get up to Demarcus Robinson. However, I think it gives you a lot of flexibility there. And if we get more clarity on that situation, but I hear you. I kind of like a smattering of these running backs. I don't mind Jones. I don't mind Singletary if you're doing it right. I don't mind Hunt and Chubb. And yeah, so I guess I'm a little less down on the overall running back slate, but I do think making sure you're thinking through those potential swap options is important. And yeah, any other thoughts on this game? Let's do just real quick Mecole Hardman versus Demarcus Robinson, because we don't have Sammy Watkins. This has been a debate that has, raged on throughout the season at points. LaMarca, do you have a preference on these two? It looks like ownership is going to be kind of similar, maybe Hardman getting a little more.
All you DFS and fantasy fanboys, you friggin' love Mecole Hardman. Demarcus Robinson is the better player.
Okay,
Better
wow.
play.
I thought you were going to say better play, but wow, you're going for better player just in a vacuum. We're doing film takes.
Sure. Yeah, why not?
Okay, no,
Sure.
well, that's just false. But you can say Demarcus Robinson's the better play. I'll buy that.
To me, you're always going to pay the ownership discount on Mecole Hardman. Like, I can't wait till we get into best ball season again next year, and somehow Mecole Hardman ends up being an 8th round fantasy pick again. I just don't understand why you guys are so enamored with this dude.
To me, I think it's actually pretty close. When you look at the projections, Hardman's projecting for a couple more points, and Demarcus Robinson is also a little bit more expensive. So I actually think the ownership disparity is warranted, but I don't think the ownership's going to get out of hand. I don't think we're going to see 40% Mecole Hardman like we did on the 3-game slate earlier in the year when Watkins was out. So I think we can talk about this more in a vacuum of who you like more. But Joe, do you have a take on Hardman or Robinson?
I think the only way I back into one of those guys is if I'm playing Mahomes and I just want to add someone to the stack. Like I feel much more comfortable just like paying 4,100 for Rashard Higgins. I know that's not the direct question, but that's kind of how I've been looking at it. Just like using the Cleveland guys in better game script, I think is the play if you're going to end up in the salary range.
And also, if you're playing, we talk about this a lot. It depends on the field sizes you are playing. If you're playing in these field sizes under, let's say like under 750 people, I think it's viable to do stuff where, say you want to fade Tyreek Hill and you want to play the Kelsey side, and then you just also play both Robinson and Mecole. So you roll out the tight end, Robinson and Mecole with Mahomes, and you just onslaught it. You bring it back with a couple Browns. And that's how you're playing it. You're playing for this game to have 60 combined points, and you're making one stand, and you're trying to capture all of the cheapy production through both of them. So I do think there are paths to playing both in small field, but yeah, you'll probably need to take a stand on those in the large field. And yeah, I think it's really close based on price, ownership, and projection. So maybe we'll get some more clarity once we sleep on it and our third eye opens up tomorrow morning. Let's move on to this last game here. We have the Saints versus the Bucs. LaMarca, I keep having flashbacks to the game earlier this season where the Saints just absolutely truck sticked the Bucs there. What are the bettors doing with this one right now?
Yeah, so this line opened up Saints -3.5, pretty quickly got bet down to 3, and that's where it has sat the entire week. 53% of the tickets on Tampa Bay, 51% of the money on New Orleans. So this game is literally the most just down the pipe game of the week. Really no significant advantage one way or the other. I think the biggest sharp lean right now is on the under. The over is getting 79% of the bets, but the under is getting 56% of the dollars. We talk a lot about divisional games late in the season are historically very profitable. That also includes the playoffs. So these two teams are great defensively. New Orleans might be the best defensive team in the league. I think that they can control Tampa Bay. The one narrative that I have heard a few times is, it's tough to beat a team 3 times in the same season. And the data suggests that just isn't true. This is the 7th matchup between teams in the playoffs, with one team winning the first 2 head-to-head matchups. And the team that is 2-0 is 5-2 in the 3rd meeting. So apparently it is not that hard to beat the same team 3 times in here. So like if you like New Orleans, don't let that scare you. And conversely, I wouldn't be blindly betting Tampa Bay just because they lost the first 2 games against this team.
Joe, this is an interesting one for DFS. Michael Thomas, probably one of the other most mispriced guys on the slate. He's going to be very popular, rightfully so, at 6,700. Alvin Kamara is going to be very popular as the standout running back play on a poor running back slate. But outside of that, the ancillary Saints guys aren't going to catch a ton of ownership. People never know how to attack the Bucs wide receivers, so I doubt any of those guys are really over 20%. How are you kind of approaching this, both from the late flexibility perspective and who you're just most interested in overall?
Yeah, I rarely play these guys like Brady and Breeze just because they don't give us anything from a rushing perspective. But like when you're thinking through the way these slates work, having your stack available late is extremely advantageous, right? Because then if you already have the quarterback and you're behind, you can get so just for example, if you're playing someone like Drew Brees and you're behind, maybe you end up playing someone like Jared Cook, who could offer a decent amount of leverage at tight end, going into the weeds a little bit with some of these guys that are a little bit lower owned. You can do that with a quarterback. You're going to have a much better chance to pass people at that point, and the price tag. So like Drew Brees, Tom Brady, these guys are so cheap in comparison to like the Josh Allens, Lamar Jacksons of the world, that I think that I do have a decent amount of interest in these guys. I think that you can do different combinations with the weapons. Like I said, I think that there's going to be some guys like Jared Cook that go extremely overlooked. And then if things are going really well, perfect. You got room for Michael Thomas, who, like you said, is one of the better points per dollar players on the slate. You have a guy like Chris Godwin, who at 6,100, I would argue is still very underpriced. So yeah, I don't really have a ton of interest in the Tampa Bay running game as of now. Kamara, still terrible matchup against Tampa Bay, but it just goes to show you what we have like at our disposal for these running backs. It's just like there's holes you can poke in almost every single running back play on the slate. Sometimes Kamara at 7,900, just the volume might be one of the more secure spots. So I think that there's ways to chalk up in this game, and there's ways to get unique in this game. And from that perspective, I think it puts the quarterbacks like squarely in play.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, for the lineups I've built so far, I've also been playing a ton of Michael Thomas, but I kind of like the idea of if I'm doing really well, I can let it ride. And if not, I'm probably pivoting him to a Mike Evans or Chris Godwin at half of the ownership. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. But I want to force myself to get in a little Jared Cook and Emmanuel Sanders, because both those guys are kind of jumping out to me as the super low owned plays that if they get rolling in the dome, we've seen it possible here. And this Bucs defense, they've been a little bit of a pass funnel, a little stiffer against the run, and we've seen teams shred them through the air recently. So I'm kind of interested in that angle. LaMarca, you have any best plays, galaxy brains, etc. here?
Well, if you really want to galaxy brain it, is Deontay Harris chasing points? It kind of feels like it's chasing points. He was on the field for just 24 snaps, but he did have 7 catches for 83 yards. He seems like a gadget player that they're kind of designing plays for, but that's it's a little thin. Like I don't hate it. I'm trying to maybe talk myself into it, but again, at the same time, it does feel like chasing points a little bit. Another galaxy brain thing is the whole Mike Evans versus Marshawn Lattimore. I feel like I've become the cornerback guy on this show. It's not a niche that I really
spot to be in.
foresaw myself being in, but like these are things that people talk about and think about. And Marshawn Lattimore, for whatever it's worth, has dominated against Mike Evans. He's going to shadow Evans. He did it in their first 2 meetings this year, and he held him to 5 catches for 66 yards combined. So Marshawn Lattimore has had a terrible season, by the way. Like, he has not been a cornerback that you need to fear, but for some reason he seems to have Mike Evans' number. I don't know if that going to drive ownership to Godwin and Antonio Brown. If so, like I might like Evans as a contrarian type play, but if Evans and Godwin and Brown are all going to be owned around the same rate, then I would probably rather just go with the other guys. I don't know. So help me out with this sort of galaxy brain situation that I found myself in surrounding the Bucs wide receivers.
Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah. I don't know. I get it, and there is a long history with Lattimore and Evans, but there was actually a good article floating around again today about why these matchups are so hard to actually use for predictive fantasy football analysis with the way stuff happens. The way Mike Evans is used, I mean, he is just one big play away, and he's going to have a size advantage on everyone. Like there's just some stuff that's really hard to account for. So I'm not factoring it into my stuff. If there was a meaningful ownership difference between Evans and Godwin and stuff, I'm definitely using that to break ties. It looks like they're all going to be roughly the same. Godwin, Evans, Brown. I will say from like a pure points per dollar standpoint, he is the most expensive and not projecting quite as well as them. But I want to have opportunities to use either Godwin or Evans here. And I've just been impressed with Evans. I mean, hyperextended that knee. I thought he was going to be a decoy last week, and he looked great. So I'm fine going back to Evans. Joe, I know you seem to prefer Godwin, right?
I do, but it has to, let me just frame it a different way. So like we were talking about DK Metcalf versus Ramsey last week, right? But we were looking at it, looking at DK versus Lockett. Their ownership was basically the same. So exactly what Pete said, I think I'm fine using it as a tiebreaker in that situation if the ownership is the same. If the ownership is really skewed in the direction of people looking at this wide receiver cornerback stuff, then yeah, I'm just going to go the other way and play right into that matchup. But this is one where I still prefer Godwin from the start. One thing that kind of sucks, I guess, about that what we were just talking about from last week was that it was DK Metcalf that went out there and went crazy. So I guess circled around my argument there. But yeah, I prefer Godwin just from the start anyways. I think that's kind of where you want to attack New Orleans is in the middle of the field. If the ownership's the same, I'm just going to play the guy that's $300 cheaper and the guy I like better anyway.
Yeah. I think that's fair. And then the other thing to keep tabs on, I think based on the tea leaves that Ronald Jones is going to suit up, I assume Fournette will get first crack at things, but I don't think it's necessarily a bell cow situation. If Ronald Jones is inactive, I think Fournette is a pretty good play at 4,900. So that's another bonus plus for leaving yourself some flexibility. I think it's hard because there's so many good plays on this slate, but if you can leave yourself two spots, a flex in another position, so you have some of those 2v2 stuff where you go cheap Bucs running back with expensive, Saints wide receiver, or you could go Kamara with a cheap Bucs pass catcher. There's different kind of combos you could do if you're really needing to catch up on your opponents who are ahead of you. So we will be back tomorrow to focus on these two games in more depth. We'll have more news by that point as well. And then we'll have the tilt space tomorrow night as well. We are in the $1,500 game changer. We're maxing out the $400 three max juke. So we're taking our shots here. We're trying to get on the scoreboard here once more. Matt LaMarca, where can the people find you? Any other plugs for you here this week?
Yeah, I wrote if you're playing slate specific stuff, Sunday only, Saturday only, I did do breakdowns for those that you can find over at Fantasy Labs. You can always find my NBA thoughts basically on a daily basis over at DraftKings Playbook. So I'm around. You can find me. Joe, what about you?
Yeah, later on today at 7 p.m. Eastern time, I'm going to do a solo showdown cram, Pete, since you're bailing on me. I'm going to go through this, tell everyone, I guess, gets to play Stephon Diggs at cap. Should be fun. Tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern time, and then this show 1 p.m. Eastern time, Tilt Space tomorrow night. So yeah, we're about a third of the way through a busy weekend, but honestly, one of the best slates of the entire year. And I wasn't saying that last week because it shaped up kind of the opposite of what I normally like. I think that this is a slate that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for people that give themselves flexibility and kind of take some chances here today, but leave a lot of stuff for tomorrow to figure out.
Yeah, for sure. This is one of those. This is not a set it and forget it slate. You get your shell in there, make sure your Packers and Rams are locked and loaded, and then be ready to redo stuff, really push those edges, because a lot of people will set it and forget it. And that's where we can really take advantage of that stuff. So we appreciate you guys tuning in. Please hit the like button and the subscribe on your way out. We will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern with Dieter to break down these two games and hopefully push our teams to the top of the leaderboards. For Joe Holka, for Matt LaMarca, I'm Peter Overzet. We'll see you guys tomorrow.